Hello, Bears fans, and welcome to a brand new edition of Bears on Tap. I am Ron Luce. I am with the Q Man himself today, and we have a very, very special guest with us today from Windy City Gridiron, Mr. Robert Schmitz. Robert, thank you first off for joining us today. I know you and Q are very well acquainted after the draft project that you guys worked on, and we're gonna dive in with you on the state of the Bears. But before we get into all of it, how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing fine. I mean, it's another Wednesday in paradise. We're not quite in June yet, but we're getting there. And we're, less than 100 days away from the NFL season? Thank goodness for that. We're crawling ever closer towards seeing them take the field again. Can't wait.
Absolutely, it's gonna be a blast. Q, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to get this project off the ground that we're kind of throwing together here on the podcast network. So I figure I'll just give the audience a few details on it.
Yeah.
So basically, we got 7 questions for Robert. Robert's our film guy, and we're going to ask these same questions to first our film guy Robert, then a stats guy, then a coach at some level, most likely high school. If we can get an NFL coach, that'd be awesome, but I doubt it. And then we're going to also talk to just a fan, one of our listeners. And we're going to compare all the answers at the end of the day and try to find, where's the consensus, where's the areas that certain people had some really interesting takes on. And I think we're going to make some good content out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Q, you came up with the idea. Credit where it is obviously due, my friend. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, to hear everybody's different opinions. And then I know we talked internally about kind of throwing our opinions into the ring too at the end of it, and just like you said, kind of seeing where everybody lands on this, slate of questions here. So, Robert, without further ado, we'll just dive right into it here. How do you see the state of the Bears?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be the representative film guy. I love it. Thank you, guys. But I honestly feel really good. I mean, it's my opinion. I got a little too much stat nerd in me, but I'll try to fence it out for you, Q. Where for years, the Bears have basically taken a bunch of players. Let's use the Jimmy Graham contract as an example, where they've said, Jimmy Graham, we're going to pay you a lot of money and you're going to play a very large role in our offense. And the players that they have chosen have been massively outsized by the expectations that that player needed to deliver on, which created Sam Mustipher, starting center, massive failure, despite him being a UDFA and never being treated fairly by even people like me, because the moment that the Bears declare them your starting center, it's like, well, best case scenario, he's going to be the 28th center in the league. What are we doing here? It falls apart. Right now, it feels to me, Ron, like the Bears don't have many players on their roster where they have signed them or drafted them with the expectation that they were going to be more than they are. Maybe the closest you get to that is Chase Claypool, but with DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney now both on the roster, if he's a good wide receiver 3, whatever, we can move past the cost that was paid for him and assess that the Bears have easily a representative wide receiver room in the NFL, if not a decent one with some serious upside, because guys like Tyler Scott, Velus Jones find a role. From a film perspective, look, the 2023 Bears are still a work in progress, but that doesn't bother me. So I really like it. I mean, are they close to being a Super Bowl contender? Not yet, but they don't have the hard limitations that a lot of other rosters across the NFL do, like the Vikings, for instance, who need probably a change at quarterback, plus more talent across their roster, plus figuring out what they're going to do with Justin Jefferson. Obviously, they're going to extend him, but what percentage of the cap is a massive talent like him going to cost, and how much is that going to limit them? Because I know I'm a film guy, but the NFL is a shell game of resources and trying to create surplus value. And the Bears, say what you will about the sorry state of their defensive line, haven't invested anything in it. So they're getting what they paid for across the board in most cases, which is a massive, massive positive over what I feel like we endured with Ryan Pace, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was constantly with Ryan Pace. Like, you paid Robert Quinn all pro money and you were hoping you got a Pro Bowl player. You paid, like you said, Jimmy Graham, Pro Bowl money and you were hoping you got a guy who was just serviceable. Like it was that constant overpay that, like you were saying. Now, next question up here is something that is pretty free reign for you to take with. But what do you want to see more of from the Bears in 2023? And you can compare that to anything, to last year, to the Bears historically, to any type of way you want to take that.
So this year, I mean, look, the really softball answer to it is I would love to see more wins, certainly more than 3, because as many different ways as the ball can bounce, football is a really brutal game. And you'll occasionally get a team like the Vikings that probably should have won 8 to 9 games last year. And instead they win 13. And now they picked really, really low in the draft. They got beat by the Giants in the first round of the playoffs. And they have to actually retool their roster after having overperformed too much. So I want the Bears, who I think got shockingly unlucky last year, and I'm glad they did. I love that they lost as many games as they did, but you have to persevere through the bad luck this next year. So to answer the softball part, before we go on to a more nuanced answer, I do want to see Darnell Mooney catch that touchdown against Washington. And if not, I'd like to see Dante Pettis catch the opportunity that he had when the ball that hit him in the face that got thrown just a down earlier. I would love to see less interceptions off of helmets. I would love to see us catch all the punts that are punted to us. Like all the basics that happened last year where it was like, what a goofy thing. I didn't expect to see an NFL receiver need 7 steps to curl on a curl route, but I'm glad that Equanimeous St. Brown took so long because it stopped Justin Fields from beating the Packers in week 14. Not anymore. They don't need to win 10 games. Honestly, if they win 6 or 7 and other teams are just better than them, I will take it. And honestly, I'll smile the whole offseason, the whole season as that happens. But this season can't be a 5-win year, pretty much no matter how many injuries you take. I mean, unless Justin Fields gets hurt, that's the obvious asterisk. But even then, you'd hope that Trevor Siemian has enough of a roster around him to not look quite as helpless as he did against the Jets. But I also want Luke Getsy to keep his word and actually show that he's got a renewed emphasis to throw the football. Everybody keeps talking about how Justin Fields scrambled out of a lot of the passing attempts last year, and that's what skewed the numbers. You're kind of true. Right? Like that's kind of right. There's also truth to the idea that the Bears called like 30 passes a game, which is really low from an NFL standard. I mean, the total pass attempts that they were going to attempt in the first place were already probably 4 to 5 passing attempts shy of what is a standard NFL diet. Now, we don't have to go all the way back to the Nagy era, even though I would love that. I mean, I'm a Big 12 football fan in college. I'm like a spread option West Coast guy in terms of my core. So I don't mind the idea of throwing the football way too much, but even with the NFL's bent, or even with the Bears seeming bent towards running the ball, we got to throw it more. And we've got to plan to throw it more if we're going to develop a healthy quick game, which the Bears need desperately. But if they end up back at ground and pound, run the ball a lot, use the quarterback to run the ball and beat the opponent to death with that, that's fine. But it's based in more outdated thinking that I think the Bears can do better. A lot of that's philosophy, though, and they do need to win games.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a ton of good things to digest there, right? Like it's something just as simple as, winning more games, but the doing the little things the right way, and just this team taking a step forward as a real football team, really, right? You know what I mean? Throwing the ball more, having a more balanced offense, not relying on your top rushing attack for the first time, best rushing attack since 1984 statistically. Like they don't need that anymore. And I think we're certainly in agreement with you there. Kind of spinning off, I think, of your answer here, Robert. I think you're going to be able to elaborate on this one. What is your favorite thing, pardon me, that the Bears are doing with, whether it's the roster, whether it's the scheme, or any aspect really of the organization? Just what is that glaring thing that stands out to you that you're like, I love that. That is my favorite thing that the Bears are doing right now.
I get the impression that the Bears are not suggesting that a specific player has to be the answer because, and I'm going to quote from Pace's tenure, because we spent big money on them, so that it has to be them. They drafted Velus Jones in the 3rd round. If he doesn't come to play in camp, he may get cut. just a year later. They spent what ended up being a common first round pick and pick number 32 on Chase Claypool. Whatever. We can get DJ Moore in a trade. We're going to, no matter what that does for Chase Claypool going forward. We got TJ Edwards, one of the best statistical linebackers and a phenomenal linebacker in free agency. I don't care. We can also get Tremaine Edmonds, despite the fact that both of these guys are more natural fits at Mike linebacker. We're going to, because we need linebackers, and that's a good player we can add to our team. Well, we have Kyler Gordon and we also have Jalen Johnson. That's not important. Let's add Tyreek Stevenson because we can. We've got Tevin Jenkins. Well, let's add Nate Davis, despite the fact that Tevin just played Nate's position and we're not moving Nate. So we'll move Tevin Jenkins again if that gets us more talent on our team. The Bears seem to be pursuing a 40 to 45 man football team instead of just thinking about the top 22, which is a big departure from not just Pace. Emery did that too. Every Bears team I've just about ever watched has been focused on who are the starters, who are the starters, who are the starters, instead of trying to be deep enough to sustain injuries. I mean, you'll luck into scenarios where Kevin Pierre-Louis on a one-year deal plays like a stud in the wake of Roquan Smith's injury, but it felt like luck. More so than we planned for this team to be deep enough to handle injuries. So I really love the fact, I mean, look, I watch enough film to realize that you can run a 4-3 defense. There are some people that'll act like not running a 3-4, not running Fangio style coverage schemes, not running match principle, all things that I love will automatically result in losses. And that's not really true. I mean, most of the time, the team with the most talent on your roster beats the other team. Like, you can end up in a, how many times would X team win versus Y team in 10 games? Sometimes the scheme will steal you 2 extra wins. So that team will win 3 games instead of 1 out of 10. But the team with the most talent wins 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 games out of 10 over the team with the inferior talent, depending on the talent gap. I love the fact that the Bears are approaching the total talent on their team like it is effectively a tank full of water, and as much talent as they can add to that roster is always a good thing in the eyes of this organization. And it's easy to do right now. The Bears are so bad that adding good football players, they were so bad that adding good football players automatically looks like superstar level ads, because the talent difference between Kindle Vildor and Tyreek Stevenson is obvious. So it'll get more complicated in the 2024 offseason, which you might argue is the more important one, because as many big moves as they're making this year, they could have added another Chase Claypool. And I mean, it would have made the roster better, but next year is where you have to start making choices, and the choices will swing the team into being a competitor for the 6th seed or the competitor for the Super Bowl over the 2025-2026 stretch. But all that to say, I love the fact that they are approaching this roster in aggregate instead of thinking that any one player will see week 18 with a guarantee, because outside of quarterback, which is always the asterisk to this rule of to this general rule, you never know which 3 receivers, which 5 linemen, which 4 defensive linemen you're going to get at the end of the year going into the playoffs. And so planning around the idea that you don't know, so let's just make everybody on the roster as talented as possible, is a huge net win.
Really quick before Q follows you up with our next question on deck here, just to kind of spur some more of your thoughts, because I think I could sit here and I could listen to you regurgitate football knowledge all day. Do you think a lot of that kind of thinking about the roster in aggregate has stemmed from just this front office essentially being a product of good organizations in the NFL, right? With Poles working his way over from Kansas City, with Cunningham coming from the Eagles, who obviously just met in the Super Bowl. Do you think it's that kind of philosophy because of what they've seen, right? Like Philly's a perfect example. They draft their front 7 on defense consistently, even though they already have a plethora. Their first pick this year is Jalen Carter. Like, just that, like you said, thinking about that aggregate, thinking about that depth in terms of talent. Do you think it's because of where they're coming from, or do you think it's just finally the right football people in the front office that are making a decision? Because at the end of the day, yes, ultimately there's only 11 guys on the field at any given time for your team, but you still carry a 53-man roster for a reason.
Right. That's a really good question, by the way, because I don't know if I'd quite thought about it. If I had to guess, though, I actually think it's because these two guys in Cunningham and Ryan Poles, who seem like they're kind of going through this as like a two-man leadership core. Yes, they have Matt Eberflus, but they
Mhm.
come from two organizations that aren't just good, Ron. They aren't just good recently. They've been good for a
Mhm.
while. Why is this important? It's not magic. It's because they have to figure out how to take limited resources and stay good
Mhm.
when the resource parity between the top 5 and the bottom 5 in the draft should mean that eventually they fall off, right? So
Mhm.
Ryan Poles had to figure out, how do we add a defensive line given that we don't have a top 20 pick? How do we figure out our quarterback scenario given that Alex Smith is winning too many games to make this easy? We can't draft top 10. How do we balance all of this? And in Philly, they had to come up with similar answers. I mean, what do they do with the quarterback position given Carson Wentz? They drafted Jalen Hurts, which ended up being quite a smart choice, but they didn't take him in the first. They didn't overreach either. They just took a calculated risk, and they've been loading up on defensive line talent, as we saw in this draft, because it's available to them, and they see defensive line as something that you need to win football games and that you can't have enough of. I mean, if you look at Kansas City, they had Chris Jones, they had D Ford, they continued to add talent, which ends you up with Frank Clark, ends you up with, now they've got Felix Anudike Uzoma. Like, you can see the threads of what these championship organizations had to do to stay good. But
Mhm.
I think, honestly, looking back, Ryan Pace taught me that if you spend enough money, you can compete for the 7th seed. I mean, in the middle of a bad sinking listing situation with the 2019 Bears, they somehow played a playoff game against New Orleans, which still stuns me sometimes because that
Mhm.
team was horrible. It was just bought and paid for, if you will. Ryan Poles seems to be trying to approach this from, which of these moves will benefit me the most 3 years from now. And I
Mhm.
think that long term thinking aspect is what Cunningham and Poles really brought over from those organizations, because they had to think about not just now, but the very long term future. And honestly, I'm not trying to take a shot that is undeserved. We will see which organization between the Lions, way better setup for 2023, but they focused their entire draft around 2023 and
Yeah.
2024, compared to the Bears, who, with picks that were a little off the wall, depending on who you ask, like Gavon Dexter and Zach Pickens, taking a DB despite everybody crowing for more and more and more offense. And then some interesting day 3 ads. I mean, I love their draft, but their draft isn't focused on tomorrow explicitly. Taking a
Mhm.
tackle in the first round rarely means that your offensive line is going to have a super stud in his first year. But come 2024, come 2025, a lot of these positions that need a little time in the oven to bake before they're ready should start to shine like a normal draft class would, right? And at that point, I wonder whether the Bears will be able to overtake the Lions, depending on what happens to some of these guys who need to burn bright, because statistically speaking, guys like Jack Campbell and Jameer Gibbs may burn pretty short in the
Mhm.
long scale of an NFL career.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back really quick to something that you said about really the 4-3 defense and the defense the Bears run.
Mhm.
Like, I think this is something that I've kind of been toying with in my mind for a while, but I feel like the 4-3 defense, and specifically the type of defense that Eberflus really likes to run, it's not doesn't feel as reliant on top shelf talent on every level of the defense. It relies on maybe two guys who are top shelf talent, and the rest you can get by with average guys and good coaching and good discipline. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked in the scheme. The idea of using this scheme a lot is like, if your head coach is a defensive guy from this type of scheme, you can put more resources towards the offense, which, let's be honest, offensive league, that's what drives everything here, and rely on your coaches and your couple top shelf guys to get you through to an average to above average defense. Now, if you want them to be top 5 in the NFL, you're going to need the Lovie Smith Bears defense where they put all their resources constantly there. But like, I think that you can really build a serviceable defense in this 4-3 Tampa 2 concept based defense that they run here. Now, go ahead.
It's funny you mentioned that though, Q, because if we take a look at the Bears free agency decisions and we take a look at the Bears draft decisions, the Bears have now had 3 second-round picks. All of them are defenders. No, they have 4 because they traded up. No, it's just, yes, it's 4. All 4 of them are defenders with Brisker, Gordon, Dexter, and Stevenson. Then out of their third-round picks, one of them's a defender. So day 2, 5 defenders, 1 offensive player. When we look at free agency, they spent huge on a linebacker, and then they picked up another linebacker to boot. It's funny looking back at the 2018 Colts defense, because I know the more I go back and look, the more I start to see a lot of these guys are studs. I just didn't know their name. Right? Like, I hadn't focused on super nickel Kenny Moore. I knew about DeForest Buckner. I did not realize Grover Stewart was as good as he was.
Yeah.
Denico Autry is no slouch. Neither is Kwity Paye, right? Like, a lot of the guys that you'll see in this system, I would argue, Q, that any defensive system that there are books on books written to solve from an offensive perspective, that's really the problem. When people act like running a 4-3 defense is implicitly problematic, that's what they're really talking about, is that there are known ways to beat this. Whereas if you throw something brand new, like in Clemson, we watched a bunch of draft tape, right, Q? Clemson runs a 3 safety defense most of the time, like very literal 3 safeties, also 2 corners, and they do a bunch of weird stuff at the snap, and it is confusing to me. Like, I have to watch the tape and watch it again to figure out what the rules are, and if I'm doing that, I'm sure opposing coaches are too. Whereas when Penn State trots out a cover 2, like 2 high shell defense, I know what they're doing. And if I know what they're doing, so do opposing teams scouting them. Now, I also think that there is an implicit advantage in running a 4-3 defense these days, and that's that nobody wants your players. So when you find a Jack Sanborn, he's better in a 4-3 defense than he's ever going to be in a 3-4, and you don't even have to draft him. And you've suddenly got a surprisingly good depth linebacker. Q and I have talked about this. If Noah Sewell can figure out how to translate the power he showed in that 2021 Oklahoma game, he could be a phenomenal will linebacker for the Chicago Bears out of the 5th round. And that's because everybody wants Trenton Simpson. Everybody wants what they thought they saw in Patrick Queen, what Roquan Smith showed he is in that 3-4 scheme. As everybody converts to a 3-4, you want those guys. You can get Tyreek Stevenson, but let's be more clear. Cam Smith shouldn't be there at pick 49 or 50, but he was, because he's not popular in a 3-4 or in a lot of the Fangio style schemes that people are running. So I think that, believe it or not, I actually think, Q, we've made this a bit of a misnomer, because again, we don't know who Rock Ya-Sin is, but that's pick number 34. Underperformer or not, that's a big investment in your corner. It's just that when you've got DeForest Buckner, that's like having Chris Jones. Run whatever you want. Your defense will be all right. Like, the Indy defense has dudes that other teams would have wanted had they had the opportunity to ever leave Indy, but the defense itself doesn't allow for some of the, let's say, star moments that you'll see other defenses feature. So I tend to think that it more holds down quality talent's notoriety, and that's okay. You get results. You get people saying, well, Matt Eberflus has never coached a bottom 15 defense, and other things that we had when he was coming to Chicago. But I do tend to think that the Bears are gearing up on talent for a reason. You need 11 guys that can play ball. Right. And my hope, because at least we saw glimpses of it last year, and if you know me at all, Ron, you know I have to work this in because I'm the president of this guy's fan club, is that the Bears have one of the best safeties especially in terms of creating, let's call them stolen plays, right, Ron? Where like people like to use the term ball hawk. I've started to hate that term because it implies that that a safety can ever draw the quarterback like as an errant throw. The quarterback shouldn't be putting the ball there, right? But Eddie can basically take plays away from offenses that aren't even mistakes. Like Tyrod Taylor, that throw was safe. If you can think back to the interception Eddie had ranging all the way over from center field, because Eddie's not that athletic. He'll just get to his spot, let alone the plays like he had against Trey Lance, where he steals an interception, or Dak Prescott, where he jumps a seam route that he just knew. And he knew where you were going with the ball. That kind of coverage instinct, I would hope, can bleed to other players like the young guys that we've got on the DB room. But if you've got Jalen Johnson who can hold his own and Tyreek Stevenson fills a role, you're going to get offenses that are becoming more and more and more pressured to throw to where Eddie is, because you're going to run out of options and you're going to run out of safety valves. I think that's the real linchpin of this Bears defense going forward. They need the pass rush to be able to generate it. But if I'm Ryan Poles and I'm trying to come up with a defensive plan, my 2024 defense is featured around Eddie Jackson, because that's probably the last good year you're going to get out of him. And they've just got to have the pieces to push the ball towards him and try to recreate that magical 2018 season.
Yeah, that 2018 year was unreal.
They had the pieces to force the ball to him. And because quarterbacks, again, it's a quick, really quick summary of it is, if you've got a defense with corners that make you plan to attack the middle of the field because the outside doesn't feel free, and you've got a pass rush to rush the quarterback, he won't check where the safeties are in the gratuitous detail that he might do it on another play. So you see Bears jersey, but maybe you don't see where 4 is specifically. And so if you think you're attacking Adrian Amos, and surprise, you mixed him up, you're attacking Eddie Jackson, you're going to get yourself into hot water. And all you have to do as a ball hawking safety is make the quarterback make 3 mistakes out of 30 passes, and you've made a monstrous impact on the game.
You're telling me the quarterbacks can't tell the difference between Amos and Jackson in a split second?
You know, I honestly, Q, don't know if they can, depending on how well they tracked it pre-snap and whether the Bears, like, it's all play type too.
It's colors. Think about it, Q. Just looking at colors.
Like 13, like probably 12 to 13 of a quarterback's pass attempts in some cases, he will turn around because he's doing the play action fake. And so as he extends it, if the Bears rotate their safeties, when you spin back around, you don't have time to figure out which guy is which. Like you're looking at your guys. It's anyways, all that to say, any defense 3-4-4-3 needs the guys that are going to tilt the field in your direction. Like you need the guys that are going to play their role. Adrian Amos and Prince Amukamara are my ideal 2018 Bears examples of that. But then you need the guys that are going to take advantage of the fact that these other guys have filled their role. Eddie, and you'd hope it'd be Tremaine Edmonds. Edmonds did not tilt the field for Buffalo so much as he filled a very difficult role, but only filled it. But that's a whole separate discussion. Like right now, the big question is defensive line. But Q and I have talked about this a lot, Ron. You need investment and resources to build a really good defensive line. And as 100%. The Bears have taken a brick by brick approach, they just haven't gotten there yet because the opportunities haven't appeared for them to do it. So I expect that they'll have a developing interior. It'll still probably be developing in 2024. To claim that either of these guys are going to be all the way there in their second season is ridiculous, but at least they'll probably have one. I mean, I could see the Bears crazy enough to have 2 first-round pass rushers in 2024 if they feel the need, but we'll have to just see, frankly, where the picks are and how the 2023 year plays out.
100%.
So I think that gives us a smooth transition, possibly, into the next question of what's your least favorite part about what's going on with the Bears right now, roster-wise, scheme-wise, organizationally, maybe hate that they're leaving Soldier Field, whatever it might be.
There's so much to like about the philosophical direction about where the Bears are that I actually had to stare at this question and really think about it. I think that the number one thing the Bears have done wrong is that by punting on 2022, which I am still in favor of, the implicit drawback is that you have hung Justin Fields out to dry. Like, you don't know what your quarterback is or isn't because you gave yourself no tools to pass the football with last year. So you've got meeting rooms, you've got the practice field, you've got, but at the same time, you know, this guy's out there every single Sunday receiving very negative feedback from, let's say, the football gods, because the moment Justin Fields finally throws with anticipation, Jair Alexander jumps the slowest curl route known to man, and you're hung with a game-losing interception. The moment that you try to force the football in garbage time, I mean, it's not an accident that every time the Bears enter garbage time and he throws the football to a read he knows he shouldn't, he gets picked. Talking week 2, Green Bay, week 14, Green Bay, all these trash time interceptions are hilarious because it's Fields recognizing what he can't do, but we're also teaching him that don't throw the ball on time against Detroit because you can just beat 3 guys and race into the end zone, mow somebody down, and score. Like, don't throw the ball on time because at any moment you're a walking touchdown. Like, don't do that. Don't play with anticipation, because if you throw the ball on third down to your leading receiver, Darnell Mooney, he might drop it and you're going to get hung with a loss. And everybody's going to remember the ball you clanked off somebody's face, which I've now mentioned twice in this podcast because it really was that weird. Like, the feedback loop that Justin Fields had to endure, you just have to trust that the most important position in football and the most important position in an NFL team's ecosystem can just ignore all of the bad lessons that he learned and somehow take away all the good ones, despite all of his experience pointing in the other direction. Why would Justin Fields entering 2023 ever step up in the pocket and not also leave it? Why would Justin Fields at any point, based on what he learned in 2022, trust a receiver to do their job? Why does Justin Fields think that play action works at all? Because especially from a pocket or pocket protection standpoint, like, you think about some of the stuff that you would hope Fields did not take away, the scores said differently. And Justin Fields isn't a stats nerd. Justin Fields doesn't care. Justin Fields is probably a competitor that does not relate to us at all. So he experienced 12 soul-crushing losses, many of which happened on the last drive of the game. What did he take away from those? And like, so that to me is really the big, it's the big dark secret, I guess, of this Bears rebuild.
Your comment on play action just makes me think he probably thinks it's like Madden. You run play action, and if they're sending one extra guy, it's just a sack. It's that simple in Madden. It's that simple for the 2022 Chicago Bears, wasn't it?
Right. I mean, especially because you got guards that couldn't win on run action, play action. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, in play action play calls, you get 2 major types of blocking, talking very high level. You either block it like it's a passing play and you cue the defensive line, hey, this is actually a passing play, or you block it like it's a running play, which should be illegal, by the way. But referees never call it because you just don't get far enough down the field. So it's not what do you call it? Like it's not illegal man downfield, because if the line is smart, they block a wide zone play, like moving one way or another. And in that moment, the offensive lineman doesn't have to do anything, because all he's got to do is show it's show it's a run, and the defensive lineman will engage him as if it's a run play, which, even if you lose, generally means that the defensive lineman is going to put a hand at your chest, he's going to stand straight up, and he's going to peek inside the rushing lane. And if at that moment he realizes, lol, it's a pass, he has to swim the offensive lineman, burst forward for the first time, and make the massive run to a rolling quarterback. And this nets you like 3.5 seconds of pocket time, unless, like the play I'm talking about with Isolin, you lose immediately and the guy just rushes downhill like a normal passing play, and you're just stunned it happened at all. Like, the Bears offensive line was so bad at pocket passing or within play action that they abandoned their entire training camp offensive concept that they had been trying to deploy through the Washington game. And I mean, the Washington game in particular was such a meat grinder of what Fields had to survive. I'm not surprised they did it. It's just borderline embarrassing that they spent all offseason coming up with that plan. You don't work on plan B that hard, Ron. You don't work on plan B that hard, Q. Like, they spent the whole offseason gearing up a specific passing plan, and they shredded it. So I really want them. Look, I don't even care if it's that great, but at least implement a plan you don't have to scrap, because Nagy ran into the same problem where consistently you saw offense 2.0, offense 3.0, offense 4.0, and every time it just got a little muddier and a little muddier to the point where by 2020, if they called a timeout, you knew they were taking a penalty on the next play. Things were just that disorganized. Like, I can't imagine. We joke, but I can't imagine how many times that staff called a play they never practiced. Like, or they practiced once, because it's a thing people talk about. And part of what helps a lot of the offenses that have stability is that you don't need Brian Daboll in Buffalo to run a lot of the same stuff that Brian Daboll ran, because you ran it for 3 years. And so the players can show up, and 8 of them have run this for years because they've been in Buffalo for that long. Chicago doesn't have that. They're going to pull some things from last season, but best case scenario, guys have been running this for 6 total weeks of game time, maybe 10, depending on how consistent we actually think they were. So I just want them to get that right. Like, come into the season with an offensive game plan, and please let it be good enough that you could finish the season with the same one.
100%. And ideally, right, you mentioned the talent gap and filling that talent gap in this offseason, hopefully.
Right.
Ideally, that should help. But again, football is football, and crazy things happen, and who knows where it goes from there. Kind of along the lines, and I'm actually really intrigued, because I feel like, Robert, you haven't really hinted at the next question at all in any of your other answers. So this is what I'm really excited to hear, is which position or positions, if there's maybe 2 that are just like, you can't choose, you got to say both, that you are most excited about in 2023 for the Chicago Bears?
Wide receiver. I've seen the Bears skimp on wide receiver my entire life. And the one season that they didn't, they had 2 guys catch for 1,000 yards in Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. And oh my gosh, we looked like world beaters when the offense was working. I mean, we have had offense or wide receiver rooms like 2018 where Bears fans will beat their chest over a below average receiver room in a 2nd round pick, Taylor Gabriel and Allen Robinson, like coming off an ACL, no less. Things worked out for Chicago, but the fact that I was certain they were going to stick with Mooney and Claypool as their 1 and 2, because that's the normal Bears playbook. So most of this, if you can't tell, is more talking about front office direction than actual talent. Like, I love the fact that they drafted Darnell Wright. It's an unsexy pick, but it's the right choice for a team that needs to invest in tackle right around this point in the timeline. But adding DJ Moore, thus making one of their 2 guys in Claypool and Mooney likely not a future Bear, because I doubt you're going to pay 3 receivers that like 8 figures a year. That to me shows a GM that looked at the room and said, this is not good enough. Like, and drafting a 1st round receiver, drafting a 2nd round receiver, that is not going to fix this either. Like, maybe we could add a Quentin Johnston. Maybe we could add a Jackson Smith-Jigba. Is that really enough? And so instead they brought over a seasoned veteran entering the prime of his career. I mean, a move that I would have told you the day before it happened, hours before it happened. You're dreaming. This is ridiculous. But to me, it is the most emblematic piece of Ryan Poles being a different GM than we've seen in Chicago for years. And that's why I end up so excited about it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That makes 100% sense, because I'm in the same boat as you, right? Like, I still remember the reaction of the Bears getting Brandon Marshall and being so excited the fact that they actually had a receiver that was worth a damn. in that receiving room. I remember going to a Chicago Bears game in 2017 when the ghosts of Marcus Wheaton and Kendall Wright were supposed to lead them to the promised land. Like you said, they have never invested in the position. On the offensive side of the football, it's been running backs, right? And then on the defensive side of the ball, obviously linebackers, safeties, etc. But to your point, they went out, they made the move for a guy like DJ Moore, who you knew Carolina didn't want to get rid of.
Right.
They were moving up in the draft to get a quarterback of the future. What better weapon to have than a guy who's literally had the epitome of the Goonies as his quarterbacks for the last 3 years and still put up over 1,000 yards in almost every single season that he's been in the NFL. Now you bring that to Chicago with a guy that, to your point, although a dark secret, a pretty talented guy at the quarterback position now for him to work with. It felt like you've seen it around the league where, the Josh Allen's got Stephon Diggs, the Jalen Hurts got AJ Brown, and then they invested in the position around those guys as well. It's just refreshing to see the Bears kind of make their own version of that move of saying, no, we don't want your first round pick in 2020, 2025. We don't need that. We want DJ Moore. And to execute that was huge.
Another thing I don't understand, because I've seen this notion perpetuated. For crying out loud, it's perpetuated on the Carolina Panthers website, if I'm remembering things correctly, is this idea that the Bears asked for somebody else. Like the implication is obviously Brian Burns, and that they instead got DJ Moore, which to me seems insane because DJ Moore is the better choice. Not only is DJ Moore going to help speaking in Carolina terms, your rookie quarterback, but DJ Moore already got paid. So DJ Moore's entire signing bonus stays in Carolina. The Bears get DJ Moore on a discount. If you trade for Brian Burns, Nito, you get to pay him top of market value because you traded for him. So his agent has all the leverage. I mean, I don't understand why the Bears would have wanted J.C. Horn or Derek Brown or Brian Burns more than they would have wanted DJ Moore. And like you're talking, just one more thing I did want to say. It's not that I think the Bears have even put Justin Fields in a position to fail. It's just that so much weird stuff happens in a football season that I tend to think Fields' grading criteria is not going to be a semantic one this year. To me, that's the problem, right? If DJ Moore tears his ACL and Darnell Mooney tears his ACL and Justin Fields doesn't put up 30 touchdowns with Chase Claypool, Velus Jones, and Tyler Scott, I think there are still going to be some people in Chicago that are going to say, I don't know, Carolina gave us a top 5 pick this year. Are you sure we're good with Justin Fields? And that pressure to me is silly, let alone if Fields gets hurt. But again, we're just not going to talk about that. Why wish it into existence, right?
Amen to that.
So on the flip side of the coin here, where do you think the Bears really need more help? And I mean, there's some obvious answers here. So feel free to talk through a few different spots, but I want you to nail down one by the end of it.
The obvious one is defensive line. But again, they're getting what they paid for. They chose this in effect. They've got some investment, which is good. I'm glad that we've gotten the ball rolling, but I don't even expect without a major move, the defensive line to improve as much as we might want it to. And that's okay because we shouldn't expect them to. I honestly think, Q, my answer to this is the offensive line, which is in a better place. But again, if a Bears fan reaches deep inside their soul and expresses what they know they feel, it's not good enough yet. The Bears in a best case scenario can field an above average offensive line. But we say this all the time. And then in a shocking turn of events, out of 10 dominoes, only 8 of them fall. Or something like that. Right now, a lot rides on Darnell Wright, and a lot more rides on Cody Whitehair, and a lot more rides on a 5th-round pick from last year. And we know just how well year 2 worked out for our last 5th-round pick that we heaped starting expectations on. I like Braxton Jones because the gimmick with Borum was always that he was a good pass blocker. And then once NFL defenses realized that they could just blast through his interior, he became not a good pass blocker. And he was always kind of a piss poor run blocker. With Braxton, at least you get plus run blocking in almost any situation. So how many L's are you willing to take on the pass game side of things? Actually decent chunk. Like if he looks like Larry Borum in pass pro, but he looks like very, 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 very low budget Trent Williams in run blocking. Okay, we can live with this. We can work with this. We can make this work within our offense. But it's a lot of question marks for a team that the other two linemen that I've not mentioned, Nate Davis and Tevin Jenkins, haven't played a healthy season in years, either of them. So it's a toss-up. And your backups are Lucas Patrick at left guard, right guard, and center. Tyree Carter, who we know next to nothing about. Alex Leatherwood, who's a gamble that I would take again, but it does not seem to be paying any dividends anytime soon. And Larry Borum. The Bears need more investment. They weren't going to do it all in one offseason. They weren't going to do it overnight. Maybe the answer is Chase Rollier, but Rollier has not finished the season either in an awfully long time. So it's not like that truly fixes the equation. And if we're all honest with ourselves, offensive line is like, it's so much more intangibles than most positions in the NFL that it's really frustrating to evaluate because the 49ers should have been bad if we judge them like a normal team last year. But
Trent Williams raises all ships, man.
You know what I'm saying, Q? Where it's like the whole offensive line, like 3 of the positions didn't have 2 starts to their name. But they figured it out just fine, didn't they? Like it's such a weird position, but we know who these Bears receivers are because literally all of them have NFL experience. 4 out of the 5 starting positions haven't played an NFL snap at that position either ever or within the last year. Actually, that's not true anymore. It's 3 now. Unless you count Nate Davis not coming directly from a Shanahan scheme and coming from a zone scheme that's similar, but it's got its differences. So now you've got Davis in a new scheme. Whitehair hasn't played center in forever. What is it? Jenkins has never played left guard before. Wright has never played in the NFL before. And there's Braxton. But so it's fine. Again, it's a better plan than a lot of Bears plans that I've seen. It doesn't really have unrealistic expectations on anybody. I hope the Bears add another depth add, but I'm not going to celebrate adding Michael Schofield again because that was a reach when we did it. Let alone
we were suffering from Stockholm syndrome by then. I was so happy about Riley Reef. You have no idea.
Yep. And so it's like the Bears have a requisite NFL offensive line, but I do think if they're going to run the scheme that they want, you want to build the Cowboys offensive line, the Eagles offensive line, the Saints offensive line from yesteryear. Like you need to get better there. But again, Rome isn't built in a day. And so you need the opportunities to be able to make those ads. Cause I mean, Ryan Pace paid a premium for almost every single one of his big moves. And I mean, literally almost every single one because the guy couldn't stop trading up. And the Bears haven't gotten there yet. I imagine the Bears are aiming to win a Super Bowl in 2025, maybe 2026. Like, I don't think that this burn is going to be as fast as some Bears fans may want it to be. And that should be something we're celebrating because once they get to that point, they don't want to drop off. Like, they don't want to build a team where things fall apart. But if you're going to put this much expectation on your quarterback, gosh, I wish his protection was a little better for a quarterback that we know likes to hold onto the ball more than a lot of others. This isn't Mac Jones.
Well, yeah. And I know that, Ron, you'll appreciate this. You might even be able to speak to it some, but like on the O-line front, and especially just the continuity and the experience in the scheme, experience with the guys next to you. It's so big. And like my brain just goes to, there was a podcast I was listening to not that long ago with Mike Golick Jr. was on it talking about his time with the Saints. And it was talking about Jari Evans. And I forget who the tackle that he was playing next to was. I don't think it was Armstead, but it was someone else just, back, like you said, the Saints O-line of yesteryear. And he was saying, those two guys, they look in the same direction. One of them grunts and they both just know.
Mhm.
because they have that experience with each
Right.
other. They know what a grunt means. They know what like
Mhm.
a sound that means nothing, but they know it means something. That's what O-line comes down to, that communication just
Yes.
being that seamless. And that's what it's going to take the Bears time to build that.
Yeah. And,
And
to
And
your
on the
point,
flip side, Q, if you don't mind me saying it, Ron, the Bears have been bad evidence of the opposite for a while now, where they couldn't pick up a stunt. And I'm convinced it's because all of them thought everybody else was the problem. Like, I don't know what was going on in the meeting rooms with Chris Morgan, but they did not seem like a line that trusted each other at all. Cody Whitehair thought Sam Musfer sucked. At least it seems that way. And he thought Braxton Jones, a rookie, did not have his head on straight. Or he was worried about getting embarrassed because he was coming back from injury and things weren't going so well, and he thought he might get cut because everybody on Bears Twitter keeps writing articles about him getting cut. And I would struggle to imagine that like his wife and kids aren't reading them and being like, "Dad, are we going to move sometime soon?" People forget that like the athlete doesn't have to read Twitter. If his mom reads Twitter and asks him about it, it's all
Right.
the same. But so like you're saying, Ron, it's like, and Q, I mean, as soon as people like lose faith in each other on the offensive line, the whole unit takes a massive step back because it's a team sport. You
Yeah.
can't entirely subsist on individuals.
Yeah, I think because I was a proud offensive lineman in my playing day, and I think because, to your point, you brought it up a little bit earlier, Robert, right? Like, offensive line is one of the hardest positions, I think, as the quote unquote common fan to judge, because it is so much relying on a unit. It is not just one man, right? Yes, obviously you improve positions of the line one man at a time, but the continuity, the communication, the amount of communication that happens on offensive line, like, I don't think anybody that's never played the sport of football might not understand. Like, if you've been around the game, you get it. But like your general common fan who just watches on Sunday and yells "Go Bears" and at their TV all day probably doesn't understand that you're calling out even in run scheme. If it's zone run scheme, you're calling out your stacks. Hey, we're here, we're here, we're here. You know, this guy's got backside. We're coming here. Hey, if he flies, you're yelling to the guy behind you that they're stunting, they're coming, you're moving. There is so much communication that goes into the offensive line play that I think we even saw it a little bit last season with the offensive line. They finally had a little bit of continuity kind of in that middle stretch of the season, right? The Miami Dolphins games, the Lions. And what did Justin Fields do? He balled out because he had at least competent, not great, but competent protection because they were actually able to work as a cohesive unit. They were beat up the entire season, right? We didn't get to see Lucas Patrick at all as the starting center before he got hurt. We didn't, they were constantly moving guys around. Braxton Jones was a fresh face. Like, to me, the biggest key, I mean, it might sound cliche, but the biggest key to me for Justin Fields' development this season is the offensive line staying healthy and just developing that continuity as a five-man group. Because if they do that, because of the improvements they made, I think that we can see Justin Fields take that third-year leap that we've seen some of these other very good quarterbacks in the NFL also make. So, absolutely agree with you. I think there's two spots in football to me you can never have enough depth at, and it's the two sides of the trenches. You got depth there, you're golden, because you lose one or two major contributors on either side, and all of a sudden it's a very different looking football team.
Oh, yeah, especially because I think people forget a lot that you need 5 starting offensive linemen, and they're all going to carry a very heavy load. You need 3 starting receivers, but the positions are so different in terms of, like, if you've got a number 1 receiver and you've got a rotating group of 2s, 3s, and 4s, you'll be fine. Because your 3 receiver doesn't do the same things as your number 1 receiver. The center doesn't catch a break if he's not any good. Like, you don't get a bad offensive lineman that you can just bury on the offensive line. The studs and duds approach does not work. For generally speaking, you'd rather have an entire offensive line of B-rate players. Actually, that'd probably be a fire offensive line compared to an entire offensive line of 2 A's and 3 C minuses or worse. But like you're saying, I mean, those are positions that you'll never quite have enough of. And the good news is Justin Fields' third-year leap, like you're mentioning, I don't semantically think he's that far away there aren't near as many things that are unfixable. Like, it's a different conversation than we had with Trubisky, where we needed to see changes happen that no other quarterback had really ever emulated. With Fields, it's as much the offense doing him a couple more favors and him playing on time, which is something a lot of guys learn. And suddenly the offense will take a massive step forward because he's been scoring around these problems anyways, like all throughout last year. I've seen people point out the Bears were 23rd in offense. That Bears team was 23rd in offense compared to their 32nd ranked defense. Why are we making Fields as out to be the problem in any capacity, Dan Wiederer? Like, I get it. There are plenty of people like you're talking about, Ron, that want to make this about Fields taking a leap forward. Honestly, to me, it's like, yes, he needs to move forward, but it's also like a rubber band just needs to snap and we get back to the normal of what a lot of these things should be and stop throwing interceptions off of people's helmets. Like the weird stuff that shouldn't happen, if that doesn't happen, and a lot of the normal things that should happen, like Andy Dalton, I'll never forget Andy Dalton coming in reserve for Justin Fields, throwing a screen pass to Darnell Mooney. Mooney runs for a 60-yard score, and the box score says Andy Dalton enters game, 60-yard touchdown pass. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, if Fields catches a couple of those breaks, like the Jameer Byrd long touchdown he had in 2022 or 2021, plus a couple more things, ends up with some nice statistical numbers, everybody will call it a third-year leap, and the three of us on this podcast will know. We'll know it was like a good, healthy step forward that mostly came from last year's development, but we'll take it all the same.
100%. Q, really quick, I know you'll appreciate the story. You mentioned the grunt and knowing what that meant. I played with a couple of guys like that throughout both high school and college, where like they had just played so much together where they would kind of just look at each other and he'd be like, they would just like say a word and they knew what it meant. Like they would like make things up. They'd be like, hey, if we're double teaming, like we're going to say this drive, we're going to say a color. And then like they would just look at each other and be like, green. Okay, green. And then they would just go boom. And then the dude's getting blown off the football. Like, it's so cool to see that communication because it really is. It's probably the one position on the field, maybe outside of like, you know, your quarterback and his number one target, where like a good offensive line is like 5 people that are married, more or less. Like you've just got that, like that feel for each other at that point. You just know each other. It's like, you know, it's like when your significant other, you know, brings home groceries and you're like, did you buy? And before you can finish, they're like pulling it out of the bag for you. Same idea with offensive line play. When it gets to that point, and then Robert, I know you're you are the film guy. I mean, that's when it just becomes offensive line porn to me, because it's a beautiful thing to watch when that happens.
So anyone out there who wants to see some of it in action, Brandon Thorne just put out a teaser on his YouTube page for his Substack of like, it's just like a few 2-minute clips of him talking with Orlando Brown through a few plays. And one of them is like, there's a corner blitz and he goes and picks it up and the guard next to him knows to fill his spot. And the whole line moves one gap down just to fill. And it's all just because he said, hey, +1 right before the snap. And they all heard it. They all caught it and boom, they all did it. That's not the easiest thing to implement, but it's it seems easy, but in the heat of the moment, in the game, like just hear that and react. It's not the easiest thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ron.
I was just gonna say it's truly a position where like you need that instinct. Like, right, they talk about defense players playing with instinct, right? You need that instinct, but also you just need to be so technically sound at what you do in order to do that, right? Because like even in Orlando Brown's case, to pick up a corner coming off the edge, for him to be able to just kick slide out there to get to him, you have to be technically sound. Yeah, you have to be able to pull that off.
So, Robert, we got one more question for you, and then we'll let you get out of here. But this one's easy for me to say at least. What's your prediction for the year?
My heart says the same 9-8 that everybody else does. Looks at a bunch of guys on the schedule and says, "Oh, how could we lose to the Raiders? How could we lose to the Cardinals? We're gonna beat the Packers." My head says 7-10. And I don't know where the losses come from. I just know that there will be probably 2 to 3 losses that we say, how could this have happened?
Mhm.
Like there's going to be a bad call that's going to twist a close game. There's going to be a horrible fumble. There's going to be an interception off a helmet. There's going to be like something weird is going to happen. And then somebody we think is going to be good is going to actually suck. Somebody that we think is going to be healthy will not. Probably like 3 people at that point. And if you're looking at a line without Tevin Jenkins, a defense without Jalen Johnson, Eddie Jackson ages too quickly. Be still, my beating heart. And then I don't know, Chase Claypool twinges a hamstring and he's never the same. Like the team doesn't look near as good as it does right now in May. And that's fine. Like none of that involves Justin Fields. This could be a really fun season, even only winning 7 games. But my head says if you plan for 7, you won't be disappointed if things go wrong. And if you end up with another 2018 season, we're literally all going to be over the moon. But I still wouldn't predict it because I think they're just a little thin. They need to catch a few too many breaks to really get over that hump. Like, to be clear, the Bears could win 9 games depending on just the teams in their division. But that means that the Lions, the Vikings, and the Packers have to all have like a couple bad outcomes. Because if any of them are a little better than you think they are, you're going to take a few more losses in the division than you planned to. Like, let's say, not that this is going to happen, but like, let's say that Jimmo never gets off the ground. Amon-Ra St. Brown gets hurt. And they lose their left tackle like the Lions do. Ben Johnson's good. That's a huge couple blows to the Lions offense, and they'll fall down to earth. They'll still be pretty good, but you could split that series, right? If none of those happen, the Lions will probably beat us twice. And so wins are so funny, aren't they? But again, I hope they win more than 7. I think they can. Like, this isn't a wins-loss predictions built on hopes and prayers where I maxed out the win total. 7 is a healthy number as long as they stay relatively healthy. But we'll see.
I love it. That's the perfect way to end it. It's just we're going to see what happens. And like you said, we're only, under 100 days now from the beginning of the NFL season. So it'll be a good one. Robert, first off, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to take a quick second and just kind of let all of our listeners who might not be as familiar with you, let them know where they can find you?
Find me over at Windy City Gridiron on not only the Windy City Gridiron podcast channel, but on Twitter at Robert K. Schmitz, where I post a whole bunch of breakdowns of all kinds of different Bears players and topics, and on YouTube at Second City Gridiron, where I should be able, I'm working on it now. We should be able to get, I think it's really interesting, Jordan Love breakdown up here fairly soon. And then we'll probably move on to like Darnell Mooney, a couple more members of the rookie class. And so anyways, I don't want to get into everything, but it should be a fun offseason.
I love it. Well, Robert, we appreciate you joining us so much. And for everybody that follows us as well, be sure to follow us here at Bears on Tap on Twitter. You can find all of our other great content for all the other sports teams we cover here in the city of Chicago over at ontapsportsnet.com and at ontapsportsnet on social media. Gentlemen, this was a blast. Robert, thank you again so much for your time today. And gentlemen, what do we say? We get out of here with a quick old bear down?
Bear down.
Bear down.